Welcome to the Faith and Feelings podcast. My name is Taylor Joy, and I'm passionate about helping you untangle and honor your emotions, authentically practice your faith, and integrate both into your everyday life so that you can experience the goodness and delight that comes from living in relationship with yourself, God, and others. Thank you for joining me. Let's get started. Before she ever read a book, Jenny was an expert at reading people. She was raised in an emotionally unpredictable and volatile home, always feeling anxious when approaching her mother. Would her mother push her away, or would she stay interested and engaged? There was never a consistent answer to this question, even from one minute to the next. Sometimes she would be playful and soothing, and other times Jenny would be on the receiving end of her mother's rage, often in the form of emotional abuse or physical violence. Jenny can't remember a time when she hadn't been hypervigilant to the smallest shifts in other people's facial expressions, body language, and moods, an adaptive strategy that she had carried with her into adulthood. If her mother was in a good mood, Jenny recalls that she could talk to her. She recalls the power that her mother held and her desperate attempts to win her approval. And if her mother was in a bad mood, Jenny recalls feeling a combination of terror, confusion, and shame as she received the blame. Was she the cause of her mother's negative mood changes? Feeling responsible, Jenny came to the conclusion, I must be flawed. Jenny wasn't flawed, but the only way she could make sense of her mother's moods was to think that they resulted from something she did, or even worse, something she was. If emotional immaturity could be summed up in a sentence, it might be this: it's not me, it's you. People who are emotionally immature often engage in inappropriate or harmful behavior and then revert to altering their perceptions of reality to fit what makes sense to them. They lack emotional sensitivity, are self-preoccupied, and often cause others to question reality instead of taking responsibility for their actions. In other words, it's your fault for what I did, not mine. Their bodies may have grown up, but they are often stuck in an earlier emotional age, acting, thinking, and behaving in chronically childish ways. Jenny was raised by an emotionally immature parent, but as she would tell you, it took years for her to begin to recognize the signs of emotional immaturity. Why? Emotional immaturity was so deeply ingrained in her family system that she didn't know anything else. We all have a mental representation of what a family tree looks like. It's a simple system of branches that include ourselves at the bottom, our primary caregivers on the limb above, our grandparents, great-grandparents, and so on, winding up to the top of the tree. But I've often wondered if this visual is too limited. What if instead of loosely connecting branches, our family systems are intricate tapestries or threads that weave and connect in ways we can't imagine? This metaphor of a tapestry is so important when it comes to describing emotionally immature parents. Their impact can often go unrecognized, and these patterns of behavior are passed down from one generation to the next, often with no one realizing it. The effects are devastating, eroding a child's sense of lovability, and as we see in Jenny's story, result in damaging messages that, when internalized, can deeply impact their relationships with themselves, others, and God. So, how does emotional immaturity show up interpersonally? And how do we recognize signs of emotional immaturity in our relationships? To continue our series on adult children of emotionally immature parents, I want to spend some time today highlighting 15 personality traits associated with emotional immaturity. A few things to note before we jump into this list. First, I think it's important to note that most signs of immaturity are beyond a person's conscious control, and most emotionally immature parents have no awareness of how they've impacted their children. As I've mentioned in previous episodes, the goal of this series isn't to blame our parents, but to name reality and seek to understand why they are the way they are. And second, it's important to understand that there is a huge difference between a pattern of emotional immaturity and a temporary emotional regression. Anyone can briefly lose emotional control or become impulsive when tired or stressed. This is human. Most of us have plenty to cringe about when we look back on certain moments in our lives. However, psychologist Lindsay Gibson points out that when a person has a personality pattern of emotional immaturity, certain behaviors show up repeatedly. These behaviors are so automatic and unconscious that people are unaware that they are doing them. Emotionally immature people don't step back and think about how their behavior impacts others. There's no cringe factor for them, so they seldom apologize or experience regret. That's the key difference. So with this in mind, let's unpack 15 personality traits associated with emotional immaturity, which are taken and adapted from chapter 2 of Lindsay Gibson's book. As you listen, consider your parents or primary caregivers, authority figures, or other formative attachment relationships in your life. Are any of these personality traits descriptive of them? Number 1, they are rigid and single-minded. As long as there's a clear path to follow, emotionally immature people often do well. However, their immaturity becomes evident in decisions and relationships. They are either rigid or impulsive, trying to cope with reality by narrowing it down to something manageable. And once they form an opinion, their minds are closed. There's one way and it's their way, and they can become defensive or reactive towards other people's ideas. Number 2, they are prone to literal thinking. If you listen to a conversation with an emotionally immature person, you'll notice how literal their thinking is. They tend to talk about what happened or what they observed, reporting facts, rather than entering into the world of ideas and feelings. They can also have difficulty thinking conceptually. In other words, they don't have the ability to think about their thinking. When emotion-inducing topics come up, their minds tend to fall into rigid black and white thought processes that reject complexity or nuance. Number 3, they have a low stress tolerance. Emotionally immature people don't deal with stress well. Their responses are reactive, and they have difficulty regulating their emotions. Once they get upset, it's hard for them to calm down, and they expect others to soothe them by doing what they want. Instead of admitting mistakes, they discount the facts and blame others. Number 4, they do what feels best. Emotionally immature people typically make decisions on the basis of what feels best in the moment, following the path of least resistance. That childhood instinct to do what feels good never changes as they grow older. They do what they want, when they want, rarely considering possible consequences. Number 5, they are subjective, not objective. When something happens, emotionally immature people evaluate the situation in a way that is subjective, not objective. Their interpretation stems from how they feel rather than what actually happened. What is true isn't nearly as important to them as what feels true. Number 6, they have little respect for differences. Emotionally immature people are annoyed by other people's differing thoughts and opinions. They believe that everyone should see things their way. They can't grasp the concept that other people are entitled to their own point of view, and are often only comfortable in role-defined relationships where everyone has the same beliefs. Number 7, they are egocentric. Normal children are egocentric when they're young, but the self-involvement of an emotionally immature person is more childish than childlike. Emotionally immature people are self-preoccupied in an obsessed way, not with the innocence of a child. They are commanded by insecurity and anxiety, like wounded people who must keep checking their intactness. Their self-esteem rises and falls depending on how others react to them, and they have high defenses which they work seamlessly to keep others from getting close enough to threaten their shaky self-worth. Number 8, they are self-referential, not self-reflective. Similar to the last one, emotionally immature people aren't self-reflective. They're self-focused, and this self-focus isn't about gaining insight or understanding. As you talk with an emotionally immature person, they'll often turn whatever you say back to one of their own experiences. While they might not overtly change the subject, they won't ask you follow-up questions or express curiosity about the details of your experience. Number 9, they like to be the center of attention. In groups, the most emotionally immature person often dominates the group's time and energy. You may wonder whether these people are extroverted. They aren't. The difference is that most extroverts easily follow a change of topic. While extroverts crave interaction, emotionally immature people crave an audience. Extroverts like to talk, but not with the purpose of shutting everyone else down. Number 10, they promote role reversal. Role reversal is a hallmark of emotionally immature parenting. In this case, the parent relates to the child as if the child were the parent, expecting attentiveness and comfort from the child. Some parents might expect their child to be their confidant. Others might expect their children to praise them and be happy for them, just as a child might expect from a parent. Number 11, they have low empathy and are emotionally insensitive. Empathy is the ability to see and feel someone else's inner experience from their point of view. It requires both imagination and attunement, and it's necessary for true emotional intimacy. Emotionally immature people are often quite good at reading other people's intentions and feelings. However, they don't use their understanding of people to foster emotional intimacy. Instead, their empathy operates at a superficially sentimental level. You may feel sized up, but not felt for. Number 12, they are inconsistent and contradictory. Emotionally immature people probably weren't allowed to express and integrate their emotional experiences in childhood. Because of this, they grew up to be emotionally inconsistent adults, and they often express contradictory emotions and unpredictable behaviors. They step in and out of emotional states, never noticing their inconsistency. These kinds of people can keep you feeling constantly on edge, unsure of whether or not they will be loving or detached, caring or angry. Their flip-flopping behavior feels chaotic in a way that's difficult to make sense of. Number 13, they fear feelings. Emotionally immature people have an automatic anxiety reaction when it comes to deep emotion. Most genuine emotion makes them feel exposed and extremely nervous. Due to their own childhood experiences, they've devoted significant energy to developing a defensive facade that protects them from emotional vulnerability with other people. To avoid dangerous emotional intimacy, they often stick to a well-worn life script and resist talking about or processing emotions. Number 14, they have intense but shallow emotions. Emotionally immature people are easily overwhelmed by deep emotion, and they display their uneasiness by transmuting it into quick reactivity. Instead of feeling things deeply, they react superficially. Their emotional reactivity may seem to indicate that they're passionate and deeply emotional, but their emotional expression often has a glancing quality, almost like a stone skipping the surface, rather than going into the depths. It's a fleeting reaction of the moment, dramatic but not deep. Number 15, they don't experience mixed emotions. The ability to feel mixed emotions is a sign of maturity. This shows that someone can encompass life's emotional complexity. When experienced together, opposing feelings tame each other and reflects the nuance of a situation. However, the reactions of emotionally immature people tend to be black and white with no gray areas. This rules out ambivalence, dilemmas, and other emotionally complicated experiences. And that is 15 personality traits associated with emotional immaturity. I want to loop back around to that question that I invited you to reflect on as I talked about this list. As you listened, were any of these personality traits descriptive of a parent, primary caregiver, authority figure, or other formative attachment relationship in your life? If so, which ones? And what did it feel like to have this named? In our last few minutes together, I want to give us some space to consider one more question, a question that might feel jarring or uncomfortable at first. This is a question that I've been reflecting on a lot as I've prepared for this episode. After listening to this list, what emotionally immature personality trait or traits might you personally identify with? As I've been working on this episode, I've been so challenged and convicted by this list. A few recent stories have come to mind where I've acted in a self-referenced, egocentric way, and where I've been driven by insecurity and other people's perceptions of me. It's embarrassing to name these behaviors as emotionally immature, and the challenge for me has been to practice non-judgmental curiosity towards my underlying anxiety or anger. I can be so quick to seek to control or deny these emotions, and this just leads to further disconnection and a sense of fragmentation within myself. I'm learning to reflect with the Holy Spirit on questions like, what was going on inside of me when I reacted that way? What was I feeling and why? And how might I have reacted out of a place of woundedness that needs tending? And then I'm learning to process my answers to those questions with trusted others. So to wrap up this episode, I'd love to invite you to do the same. First, consider a recent experience where you might have reacted with some emotional immaturity, and then invite the Holy Spirit into your reflection. See if you can notice the quiet compassion and tenderness that the presence of the Holy Spirit brings into this internal processing. Recently, I've been praying this paraphrase from Psalm 139, which says, God, I invite your searching gaze into my heart. Examine me through and through. Find out everything that may be hidden within me. See if there is any path of pain I'm walking on, and lead me back to your glorious everlasting way, the path that brings me back to you. After identifying a recent story, share your reflections with a friend. Maybe even share this episode with them and then process your reflections together. I'm learning that voicing our mistakes and vulnerabilities is a critical spiritual practice towards greater maturity. I'm so grateful that you listened to today's episode. Thank you for spending time with me. I'd love to hear from you. Connect with me on Instagram at TaylorJoy or through my website, taylorjoymurray.co. Also, if you enjoyed this conversation, it would mean so much to me if you took a minute to subscribe and review the podcast. This is an easy way to partner with me and is invaluable in reaching new listeners. Until next week.